Olivia, so good to talk to you. So, Snetterton was another decent outing for the Prismatic team. Although, let's maybe start by talking about the accident at the start of race one, because that was a bit hairy. You and Sascha were both lucky to get through that, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's even going back to previous seasons, we've noticed incidents coming through that hairpin of turn two because it's such a everyone going such a high speed and is still sort of 2-3 abreast coming through turn one, and then when we saw it in both races that you can then have big incidents at turn two. Um, our qualifying, we need to work on qualifying pace, I think, more than anything, and that's definitely a focus going into next week. But what it does mean for those race ones is that we have the ability to ease into those known trouble areas, a bit like we had at Brands Hatch. And yeah, there was a car upside down, but got good spot calls from Rachel, and was able to get through. Unfortunately, from some incidents further forward, there was a car that picked up some damage later in the lap. And as I was trying to work my way past that driver, it sort of disconnected me from the draft train. And so I got a little bit hung out to dry there, unfortunately. But it also meant that we were away from any real trouble going forwards. It was I could see Sascha up ahead was getting into quite a few hairy situations. So in that sense, having that buffer in front wasn't a terrible thing, but obviously it meant that I couldn't capitalize as easily on any mistakes from the cars ahead. So a little bit of a lonely race in race one. Had a bit of a battle with the Alpine cars near the end, but ultimately after penalties it was P14 for me, and then P16 for Sascha after incident a little bit further ahead. So like decent results, but obviously what that then meant is that we were slotted into that sort of midfield spot for the start of race two.
And obviously, race one demonstrated that you are helping each other out. I mean, can you explain how you're working together in the races as teammates?
Yeah, so it's sort of a lot of it is just making sure not to unnecessarily attack and get into a battle with each other and slow each other down. So I could have maybe got a run off the initial start of race one, but first of all, there wasn't really a gap to go into because there was an entire field of more cars to fight. But also, if we got into a side by side and checked ourselves up, then we could both lose the draft train. And so, because I knew she had ultimately better pace at Snetterton this week, I decided to slot in behind coming through turn one, and then because we're single file nose to tail, it means that when there is that incident in turn two, we can just slot through in a row, basically, and don't have to worry about where. Like for her, she doesn't have to worry about what the car behind you, where they didn't go for a dive, because she knows that I'm thinking about both our races, not just mine. Whereas if it was another driver, they might try and use that to make a move happen. So there's not really much direct communication. We had Jess, who is off in Germany, or was in the hotel ready to go to Germany, which is where her and Sascha and a couple other Prismatic members are right now. But we had Jess available to pass messages between the two garages if it's necessary, which is always quite a helpful thing. Ultimately, wasn't really too much communication needed. It was just we both know to give that little bit of kindness to the other car, and having an ally in that sort of situation is always a nice thing to have.
Yeah, and of course, in race two, it was a similar story. Although you did benefit from several incidents in the field, and you both kept it on the island, as it were. And I guess you would probably say that race two at Snetterton, which is neither of your favourite circuits, is a pretty good result to take out of there, right?
I mean, given how lap one went, yeah. So of course we were in that pack to start race two at that point, and I unfortunately didn't get the best start. I was a little bit too heavy on the throttle on the getaway, and so spun the tires, bogged down a bit, and immediately that means that every car behind's trying to take it 3 wide, trying to take advantage and get that spot quickly, because with how these races are, there's a lot of cars who are starting at the back of the field who might be very quick but got into an incident in race 1, didn't finish race 1. And so they're desperate to get back to that lead group to try and make up for and try and mitigate the damage of the round. So I knew there was a lot of faster cars behind, and as soon as I had that start, the pressure was immense. So ultimately, Sascha was the first one to actually get into trouble because of a dive in the hairpin that collected the cars ahead, and she just had nowhere to go. I think got a little bit damaged, but also got checked up and put to the back of the field. And then I was just side by side, 3 wide for most of the lap, and then unfortunately, there was a little bit of contact when I was middle 3 with an Alpine on the inside. Gave me damage on the front and the rear and wheel damage, but luckily it wasn't enough to require a meatball, and it was still drivable. It was just kind of slow. So our opportunities in that race kind of got taken out of our hands from that point onwards. It was very much just getting the cars to the finish and hoping that more issues happened for the cars ahead to give us those spots, which ultimately did end up happening. We've ended up finishing 15th and 16th again from race 2. But it definitely wasn't the most exciting or enjoyable way to make that happen. So it was a lot more fun running that sort of race 1 at Zandvoort, where we were really fighting for those positions. And of course, race 2, which had a better result in. So definitely going into Alton Park, I think the 2 things to work on are getting the qualified pace in so that we can be starting race 1, looking forwards and trying to make some moves on the initial start. But also, I need to make sure that on those starts in the pack, I'm able to withstand that pressure. And knowing the track very well is going to help with that. But ultimately, it's experience that it's difficult to really get, because these drivers are so used to driving on the very edge in these slower cars. I'm coming from faster cars where there's often a little bit more room given. There's often not as much tight battling. It's a lot of strategy-based overtakes. Whereas this, they're using every inch that's available to them. And so I need to maybe not give the room for someone to go 3 wide, because they're going to take it and it's going to slow us all down.
So you're saying that the F4 cars actually invite a lot more risk than maybe the larger cars would do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously they're fragile. They're still open wheelers. It's not like you're driving a touring car around these circuits where you'll go for a lunge and sort of door someone out of the way because they can take that. But there are cars that are a lot easier to drive in a pack. The dirt isn't as strong, and there's a lot lower of a field spread. So like the entire field will be within a second of race pace sort of situation. And because of that, the cars won't string out. They'll stay together with the draft, and you'll always be in close quarters. And that's definitely a thing where, coming from the IndyCar, for example, the race pace difference is a lot larger. The dirt is a lot of a bigger factor through corners, so you can't follow as closely. And then you've got resources in terms of strategy to make those moves quickly and get away. That's not a luxury that we have in F4. And so definitely a lot of learning to do in terms of keeping close in those situations, while obviously still making sure to minimize risk, because ultimately, as sort of pedestrian as some of these races have been, with not really being able to race many people, we're still picking up good points because we're able to consistently finish. I think we're probably the only team that has managed to make it through all 6 races so far without a trip down pit lane. I think every other team has had some major incident that's forced that. And so we want to try and ramp up the aggression and the fighting a little bit without compromising that consistency, that reliability that we've been carrying so far this season.
And if we look at a team like Williams Esports, which is obviously having a few more problems than they expected in this F4 season, why is it that a team such as Prismatic, which obviously relies on a lower level of resources, is able to get things together, but a team like Williams Esports is having so many issues? What might be the difference there, do you think, for you?
I think a lot of it is that they're a team that's used to being at the front of every field they race in. And so the drivers have that ambition to work their way from the front. But it's, again, with how tightly matched these cars are, it can be very difficult to make all of those overtakes in turn, especially with the reverse grids and the race 2s, without coming into some sort of trouble. So there's got to be that balance of going for as many positions as possible, but not putting everything on the line for just a couple of points, because the point structure goes so deep in this championship, down to 20th place. Every position matters, and if you lose 10 spots trying to gain 1, that's a huge deficit. Whereas if it was, say, a move to go from 11th to 10th, there would be no risk in sort of the classic F1 point structure, because you either crash out and finish with no points, or you don't make the move and finish with no points, or you make the overtake and you get a point. Whereas with how the championship is set up now, as of this season, it encourages that sort of calculation of every spot is important. So you don't want to put any of them at risk by taking unnecessary lunges, for example. I think as our team, we're sort of used to that sort of thing of just trying to make sure to drive them what we know we're capable of. And that really benefits us.
So Autumn Park coming. Yeah. So Autumn Park coming up. As you and Sascha both are people who specialise in that circuit, can we maybe look to Prismatic breaking into that magic top 10?
I mean, I'm certainly hoping so. It's in the pre-season interviews down at Motorsport UK. That's the one that I targeted. I said that's my best opportunity. I think for Sascha, she's gonna be feeling quite confident, but I think it's a track that a lot of people do have some knowledge of. I know she's looking forward to Knock Hill after the second break, and so that's really going to be her target. But this is my home track. I'm sort of 30 miles away from it. I've been there a few times now in real life to sort of see different series race there, and having that connection to the track gives you that passion to really put that much more into it. So I'm going to be really making sure to find every last 10th and 100th I can, and especially trying to get that qualifying pace sorted, run a lot of sort of qualifying simulations to try and make sure that I can start race 1 on the best foot, but then use my sort of knowledge of the track to pick through, again, while trying to keep everything in one piece and keep out of trouble. But from qualifying, I then know my race pace is good, and there's 40 minutes of racing to try and work up from wherever I qualify up into that top 10 position, and maybe as well with the help of that reverse grid. We haven't been flipped by it yet. We had a couple opportunities, but if I can sort of finish race 1 closer to like P12, like I had race 2 at Zandvoort, if I get there in race 1, there's a much bigger chance that we can end up at the front of the field for that second race, and I feel much more confident in defending that at a track like Alton Park compared to, say, a Snetterton.